3:20 p.m. local time. The Caribbean Sea looked calm, almost too calm. Flat water, clear visibility, the kind of afternoon that makes sailors believe the ocean is giving them room to breathe. But at sea, calm water does not always mean a calm situation, especially not when a United States carrier group is moving through international waters. At the center of that formation was the USS Gerald R. Ford. Not a small escort, not a support vessel, not just another gray silhouette on the horizon. This was one of the most advanced naval platforms ever placed on the ocean. A floating airfield, a command center, a moving fortress of steel and technology, more than 100,000 tons of American engineering carrying thousands of sailors, advanced aircraft, layered sensors, and a protective reach that stretched far beyond what the human eye could see. On the bridge, the watch team was not expecting drama. They were doing what professional crews do every hour of every day, watching, logging, confirming, and filtering the normal noise of the sea. Merchant ships, fishing boats, routine maritime traffic, small contacts moving slowly across radar screens. Nothing unusual. Then one contact changed. A Venezuelan naval vessel adjusted course. Not a small correction, not a drift caused by current, not a simple navigation adjustment. It turned toward the carrier group with enough purpose that the movement could not be ignored. No one shouted, no one rushed, no one turned the moment into theater. That is not how experienced naval crews operate. The first response was quiet confirmation. Contact has changed heading, speed increasing. That was the moment the day stopped being routine. The USS Gerald R. Ford did not suddenly turn away. It did not speed up. It did not make a dramatic move for cameras or headlines. It did not need to. A carrier does not behave like a smaller ship. It does not depend on sudden motion to show confidence. Its strength is not in panic. Its strength is in presence. Inside the operations center, the picture was already forming with precision. Range, bearing, speed, course. Every number was clean. Every change was recorded. The Venezuelan vessel was not wandering. It was not confused. It was approaching with intent. And at sea, intent matters. The distance began to close, slowly at first, then with a rhythm that made the contact more serious. Still, there was no radio call from the approaching ship, no bridge-to-bridge clarification, no explanation, no attempt to coordinate, just movement and silence. That silence was important. On a U.S. Navy vessel, silence from another naval ship approaching at close range is not treated as empty space. Silence is behavior. Silence is a choice, and choices are logged. Around the Ford, the escort ships made subtle adjustments, not dramatic turns, not visible displays, just small movements measured in fractions of miles, creating better angles and cleaner coverage. From far away, it may have looked like nothing at all was happening, but inside the formation, everything was already happening. The Gerald R. Ford is not designed to wait until a problem is close enough to feel personal. It is designed to understand the environment long before that point. Its sensors do not depend on eyesight. They read the ocean in layers: surface, air, signals, movement, patterns, and timing. By the time the Venezuelan vessel came within visual range, it had already been tracked, classified, studied, and recorded. Every adjustment in speed, every change in direction, every signal, every pause. This was not yet a crisis, but it was no longer neutral. The officer of the deck kept the voice steady and the course steady. That matters more than most people realize. At sea, posture is language. Sudden movement can create confusion. Calm movement communicates control. The approaching ship kept coming, and that was when the imbalance became impossible to miss. The Venezuelan vessel was not closing on one ship. It was approaching an entire carrier group, a network of platforms, aircraft, sensors, and decision-makers built to operate as one complete system. Around the Ford were advanced escorts with powerful detection systems already watching the contact. Above and around the formation, aircraft were available to expand the picture at any moment. Nothing needed to be displayed openly. Nothing needed to be announced. The U.S. Navy does not need to be loud to be ready. From the Venezuelan bridge, the Ford must have looked enormous. A floating city, a steel island, impossible to miss. But what they could not see was the invisible perimeter around it, a zone of attention and calculation stretching far beyond the horizon. That was the mistake. The mistake was not simply turning toward the carrier. It was not only the approach. The real mistake was assuming this was a ship-to-ship interaction. It was not. It was one vessel pressing toward the center of one of the most protected naval formations on Earth, while every layer of that formation was already aware, already prepared, and already in control. And the Gerald R. Ford had not even needed to acknowledge the challenge. That silence was not hesitation. It was control. And in naval operations, control always comes before consequence. From outside, the scene remained almost unchanged. The Ford held its course. Its speed stayed steady. There were no sudden turns, no visible display meant to create headlines. To someone without training, it might have looked like indifference. It was not indifference. Deep inside the carrier, beneath the flight deck and miles of steel corridors, the operations center was alive. Screens glowed. Data refreshed in real time. Radar returns blended with broader tracking feeds. Air contacts stacked above surface contacts. The entire space became a living map of everything moving around the formation. The approaching Venezuelan vessel was no longer just a dot. It had a behavior profile. Speed changes were measured. Course shifts were compared. Signal patterns were reviewed. Passive systems listened while active systems remained disciplined. The Ford did not need to announce that it was watching. It preferred something more valuable than noise. Confirmation. This is how professional naval power handles a tense moment. It understands the situation faster than the other side realizes the situation has changed. The network around the Ford extended far beyond the carrier itself. Escort ships contributed their sensor pictures into one shared view. Aircraft refined the wider surface picture. Analysts were not just tracking where the Venezuelan vessel was. They were tracking how it behaved between each movement. Every few seconds, the projected closest point of approach tightened. Still no call. Still no explanation. Still silence. That mattered because operating rules at sea are not there to slow decisions. They are there to prevent mistakes. And one of the clearest signs of intent is the refusal to communicate while moving closer. The Ford's command team did not raise its posture outwardly. It raised readiness internally. Watch conditions shifted. Flight activity adjusted. Aircraft already airborne received better angles and wider patterns. Aircraft on deck were organized with purpose. Timing, fuel, positioning, and movement were all refined quietly, without a public signal. This was not an emotional reaction. It was a professional posture adjustment. On a carrier, a tense situation is measured in layers. First comes awareness, then comes control. Only later, if absolutely necessary, comes a stronger response. The Venezuelan ship crossed another threshold. The distance became close enough that doubt began to disappear. Visual confirmation matched the digital picture. The vessel's identity was clear. Its equipment was observed. Crew activity was noted. Still no hails. That silence was logged again. Inside the Ford, the question was no longer, what are they doing? The question was, why are they still doing it? Because by this point, ambiguity was gone. Any trained naval crew understands distance. Any bridge team understands carrier operations. Moving toward a U.S. carrier group without coordination is not a casual misunderstanding. It is a message. The Ford did not answer that message with words. It answered with positioning. Escort ships adjusted station again, slightly but meaningfully. Their coverage overlapped. Their angles improved. Their presence became more complete. Nothing looked dramatic from the outside, but the geometry had changed. That is the part most people never see. Carriers do not rely on intimidation alone. They rely on inevitability. Every system, every person, every procedure aboard the Ford was now aligned around one reality. If the moment continued to intensify, the outcome had already been shaped. The question was no longer capability. The question was necessity. And necessity would be determined by the next move of the approaching vessel. Then the Venezuelan ship slowed slightly, a small reduction in speed, a hesitation, then a minor course adjustment. Not a full turn away, not a dramatic exit, but no longer the same level of pressure. Inside the Ford, that did not create celebration. It created confirmation. The projections were rerun. The course shift was compared against the previous behavior. The change was subtle, but it was real. Pressure was working. No open warning had been needed, no public statement, no dramatic display. The Ford had communicated entirely through presence, precision, and control. That is the quiet truth of modern naval influence. You do not need to raise your voice when the other side already understands the message. The USS Gerald Ford had not made a show of itself. It had not turned the moment into spectacle. Yet the situation was already changing because somewhere on that Venezuelan bridge, someone had started to understand what they were approaching. Not just a ship, not just a formation, a complete system designed to remain calm, gather information, and bring uncertainty to a quick conclusion if required. And now that system was fully awake. The shift above the carrier came without announcement. There was no dramatic broadcast, no flashing signals meant for a camera lens. The Ford does not announce every stage of readiness. It allows others to notice the change. The airspace began to feel different. Aircraft that had been flying routine patrols widened their patterns. Their altitude and spacing changed. Their coverage expanded well beyond visual range. To someone looking up from the sea, they might have seemed distant, almost casual. They were not casual. Each aircraft was now part of the same larger presence. Sensors were exchanging information. Data moved through the group's network. Every movement had purpose. The air wing was not there to create panic. It was there to remind. From the deck of the Venezuelan vessel, the sound would have been unmistakable. The low, steady roar of naval aviation overhead. Not random movement, not loose circling, disciplined patterns, controlled spacing. A language every naval crew understands. You are not alone out here. At sea, power is rarely about what you point at someone. It is about what surrounds the moment. The escorts tightened their positions again. The Venezuelan ship found itself inside overlapping areas of attention at the same time. No dramatic display, no open confrontation, just geometry, precision, and certainty. This is when miscalculation becomes visible. The Venezuelan ship did not make a sudden retreat. It did not immediately turn away, but its confidence began to fade through small decisions. Slight heading changes, uneven speed control, hesitation where there had been none before. Inside the Ford, that hesitation was noticed instantly. Every professional crew learns this early. Confidence has a rhythm, doubt has one too. The carrier kept moving as if nothing had changed. Steady, predictable, unbothered. That was deliberate. Sudden changes can invite misunderstanding. Calm removes that excuse. On the flight deck, the scale of the ship remained almost unreal. Sailors continued their routines with discipline. Deck crews moved with precision, signals were given, aircraft were handled. The operation continued. That normality was part of the pressure. When a carrier keeps working while another vessel tries to create a moment, the message is clear. You are not the center of this operation. Above the group, an airborne early warning aircraft maintained its orbit, watching a huge stretch of ocean and sky. Information flowed quietly into the network. The Venezuelan vessel was now only one point inside a much larger picture. And that picture did not favor them. Still, the U.S. Navy did not speak publicly. In this context, silence was not weakness. It was confidence. Then the Venezuelan ship adjusted again. This time, the change was harder to ignore. Speed came down. Course shifted enough to widen the projected passing distance. The vessel remained nearby, still visible, still present, but it was no longer pressing in the same way. That was the turning point. Not because the Ford demanded it, because reality had finally become clear. This was not a duel. It was not even a true standoff. It was a test of proximity against a formation that does not need proximity to dominate the situation. Every second the Venezuelan vessel remained close, it was being recorded. Every motion was time-stamped. Every behavior pattern was captured. This was not only a tactical moment, it was information being gathered in real time. And information lasts longer than bravado. On the Ford, there was no announcement when the contact began to peel away. No visible relief. No break in discipline. Because this was not treated like a victory. It was treated like a correction. The show of presence had done exactly what it was designed to do. Resolve the moment without noise, without spectacle, and without crossing a line. The message had been delivered in the only language that truly matters at sea. Presence backed by inevitability. As the distance slowly widened, the carrier group remained what it had been the entire time. Stable, disciplined, dominant, and calm. Somewhere between the aircraft overhead, the escort positions around them, and the realization of what they had entered, the Venezuelan challenge faded into compliance. The USS Gerald Ford did not chase. It did not plead. It did not react emotionally. It simply remained. And in modern naval power, that is often the strongest move of all. The turnaway was not dramatic. There was no hard movement that could be turned into propaganda or humiliation. The Venezuelan vessel adjusted by degrees, not by a sudden swing. Speed eased down gradually. The bow no longer pointed toward the carrier group. It pointed away just enough. But to the professionals watching the data, the meaning was unmistakable. This was no longer confidence. This was damage control. Inside the USS Gerald Ford, no one needed to use dramatic language. Naval crews do not think that way. They think in measurements. Range increasing, closest point widening, relative motion stabilizing. The indicators were clear. The challenge phase was over. On the Venezuelan bridge, the realization probably arrived in pieces. First, the aircraft overhead. Too organized, too steady, too deliberate. Then the escorts, never rushing, never closing carelessly, but always exactly where they needed to be. And finally, the silence from the carrier itself. No public warnings, no emotional reaction, no need to prove anything. That silence was the message. Naval professionals read behavior more than words, and the behavior of the Gerald Ford was clear. The situation was already under control. There was no need to intensify the moment because doing so would not improve the carrier's position. It would only narrow the other side's options. The Venezuelan ship slowed again. This time, the reduction was visible even without advanced instruments. The wake shortened. Movement on deck changed. Crew members appeared more cautious than assertive. The mood of the approach had shifted. Inside the Ford's operations center, analysts compared the timeline against known patterns from similar encounters. The approach looked like posturing. The withdrawal looked like recognition. That is how many confrontations end, not with spectacle, with understanding. The understanding that this was never a test of bravery. It was a test of awareness, and awareness arrived late. The USS Gerald R. Ford is not built to impress through size alone. Its real influence comes from certainty. Certainty that every possible outcome has already been considered. Certainty that restraint is a decision, not a limitation. Certainty that calm does not mean unprepared. For the Venezuelan command element, the calculation had changed. Every extra minute near the carrier was another minute of exposure, another minute of observation, another minute where a mistake could create a situation no one could easily undo. That is the part many people miss. Creating distance is not weakness when staying close gives you fewer choices. The Venezuelan vessel maintained distance now, still on radar, still technically nearby, but no longer pressing, no longer testing. The challenge had collapsed into coexistence. On the Ford, operations continued as if nothing had happened. Flight deck routines continued. Internal communications stayed professional. Logs were finalized. No public celebration, no emotional statement, no dramatic victory language. Because from the U.S. Navy's perspective, nothing extraordinary needed to happen. This is how deterrence is supposed to work. Not through chaos, not through headlines, but through one side quietly realizing that the game it thought it was playing was not the game on the board. The mistake was not simply approaching the carrier. Ships interact at sea all the time. They watch each other. They measure boundaries. They signal intentions. The mistake was believing that proximity created leverage. It does not. Against a carrier group, proximity can remove options. It compresses timelines. It strips away ambiguity. It turns posturing into exposure. And once that realization becomes clear, there is only one rational move left. Create distance. The Venezuelan ship did exactly that. No apology, no explanation, just distance. The USS Gerald R. Ford did not pursue. It did not need to. Pursuit implies uncertainty, and the carrier had none. The message had already been delivered, received, and understood without a single public exchange. That was the moment the encounter ended. Not because the sea changed, not because anyone shouted, but because one side finally understood what the other side had known from the beginning. You do not challenge a system by moving toward its center, and you do not mistake silence from the U.S. Navy for hesitation. Sometimes silence is simply the sound of a decision already made. By the time the distance opened again, the Caribbean Sea looked almost exactly as it had before. Calm, blue, deceptively quiet. The USS Gerald R. Ford continued through international waters, steady and disciplined. The formation stayed intact. The mission continued. Operationally, the carrier group had not been disrupted. From the U.S. Navy's perspective, there was no dramatic incident to solve. There was behavior to record, a pattern to analyze, and a lesson that had already been delivered. Every maneuver from the Venezuelan vessel had been captured. Every hesitation, every delayed adjustment, every course correction. It was all time-stamped and archived. Not for headlines, for future understanding. That is how modern naval power works. Deterrence does not end when ships separate. It continues in reports, databases, briefings, and future decisions. Long after the Venezuelan ship created distance, the encounter still had value because it showed how that vessel behaved under pressure. And at sea, behavior becomes memory. On board the Ford, there was no sense of triumph. Sailors do not celebrate restraint, they respect it. The flight deck returned fully to routine rhythm. Watches rotated. Logs were completed. The ship remained what it had been before the approach, a moving command center projecting stability, not chaos. That stability is the point. The objective is not humiliation. It is not spectacle. It is not to feed a public narrative. The objective is freedom of movement, professional control, and the prevention of miscalculation. The Ford did not need to push the Venezuelan vessel away. It only needed to make clear that further pressure would be unwise. And that demonstration worked. The broader message was not aimed only at Venezuela. It was visible to anyone watching, allies, competitors, analysts, and every Navy that studies how power is used at sea. The message was simple. You do not force the U.S. Navy to react. You force yourself to decide whether you really want the reaction. The encounter reinforced a reality that has shaped naval operations for decades. Restraint backed by overwhelming capability is not weakness. It is control. The Ford did not escalate because it did not need to. It did not speak loudly because the warning was already understood. And sometimes an unspoken warning carries more weight than any announcement ever could. In the days after, there were no dramatic declarations, no public victory lap, no attempt to turn the moment into a spectacle. That silence was intentional. Escalation feeds narratives. Silence starves them. The carrier group moved on, but the lesson stayed behind. The mistake was not that Venezuela approached. Naval forces interact. They test distance. They send signals. That is not unusual. The mistake was misjudging the kind of boundary they were approaching. A carrier group is not one platform. It is a layered system designed to manage tension from the first sign of uncertainty to the final decision point. Challenging it up close does not create leverage. It reduces your own room to maneuver. That was the lesson delivered that day. No dramatic display, no public confrontation, and no need for spectacle. Just a controlled demonstration of presence so complete that nothing else was required. As the Gerald R. Ford continued over the horizon, the sea remained calm. Nothing dramatic marked the moment for the casual observer. No viral scene, no breaking spectacle, no unforgettable image for social media. And that is exactly why it mattered. Because the most effective demonstrations of power are often the ones that end quietly, leaving everyone involved with fewer illusions than they had at the beginning. So the question remains, should the United States answer moments like this with a stronger public response, or is measured restraint, backed by total readiness, the smarter tool? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read everyone. And if you want more real-world naval encounters explained with precision, context, and a calm professional breakdown, subscribe and stay with us. Out here, it is not about who makes the most noise, it is about who never has to.